President Donald Trump has announced that the United States intends to run Venezuela after it carried out a large-scale attack and claimed to have captured its president, Nicolás Maduro, flying him out of the country with his wife. Explosions were heard in the capital, Caracas, this morning, as well as in other Venezuelan cities. Nicolás Maduro has already been charged in New York with drugs and weapons offenses. While at a news conference at his Mar-a-Lago home in Florida and flanked by members of his top administration team, including Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio, President Trump said the United States will be running Venezuela until such time as a safe and orderly transition can be achieved.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So we don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in, and we have the same situation that we had for the last long period of years. So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe,
President Trump, there at his news conference, he also said that no U.S. service personnel were killed in that operation in Venezuela. Also said that the U.S. is ready to stage a second and much larger attack on the country if that were necessary. Our South America correspondent, Ione Wells, has more details on what happened. Handcuffed, blindfolded, captured from his country. This is Venezuela's president, Nicolás Maduro, being sent to the U.S. after being seized by U.S. forces.
It was a force against a heavily fortified military fortress in the heart of Caracas to bring outlaw dictator Nicolás Maduro to justice. It was dark and it was deadly, but captured along with his wife, Celia Flores, both of whom now face American justice. Maduro and Flores have been indicted in the Southern District of New York, Jay Clayton, for their campaign of deadly narco-terrorism against the United States and its citizens.
The capture led many wondering who would now run Venezuela. And then, this.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition.
Washington says Maduro will face charges including conspiracy to commit narco-terrorism and import cocaine. His seizure was part of a huge military operation. Venezuela's capital, Caracas, woke to the sound of the city under attack. Helicopters, flames, explosions. These were strikes on the city's key military sites. Eyewitnesses who woke in the early hours to the sound of fumes. This marks the biggest U.S. military intervention in the region in decades. For months, Washington has sent troops, warships, and aircraft to the Caribbean. It has seized oil tankers near Venezuela and carried out dozens of strikes on alleged drug boats, killing at least 110 people. Operations, it says, are part of an armed conflict against traffickers. But legal experts say it may breach the laws of war. The U.S. has long accused Nicolás Maduro of running a criminal network, claims he denies. Just days ago, he said he was open to talks.
If they want to seriously discuss an agreement to combat drug trafficking, we're ready. If they want Venezuelan oil, is Venezuela ready for U.S. investment? Like with Chevron, whenever, wherever, and however they want.
What remains of Venezuela's government says it will fight, but the U.S. wants regime change. And today, the U.S. showed once again it will use whatever force it takes to get what it wants. Well, let's talk more about Nicolás Maduro. The last few hours have seen a remarkable change in his fortunes. This is believed to be Nicolás Maduro's final public appearance before U.S. military forces launched that large-scale strike on Caracas and captured him. Here he was meeting the Chinese special envoy on Friday. It was said to be a cordial meeting. Mr. Maduro received a decorative vase. He presented the Chinese diplomat with a painting in return. But then, a few hours later on, Donald Trump was sharing a new picture on Truth Social that he said showed Nicolás Maduro, the former Venezuelan leader, on board the USS Iwo Jima. That's a vessel that he told Fox News was bringing the Venezuelan leader to the United States to face various charges. Well, let's hear some of that remarkable press conference that President Trump held in Florida, where he began his remarks with this description of the U.S. military action in Venezuela.
Late last night and early today, at my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela. Overwhelming American military power, air, land, and sea, was used to launch a spectacular assault. And it was an assault like people have not seen since World War II. It was a force against a heavily fortified military fortress in the heart of Caracas to bring outlaw dictator Nicolás Maduro to justice. This was one of the most stunning, effective, and powerful displays of American military might and competence in American history. And if you think about it, we've done some other good ones, like the attack on Soleimani, the attack on al-Baghdadi, and the obliteration and decimation of the Iran nuclear sites just recently in an operation known as Midnight Hammer, all perfectly executed and done. No nation in the world could achieve what America achieved yesterday, or frankly, in just a short period of time. All Venezuelan military capacities were rendered powerless as the men and women of our military, working with U.S. law enforcement, successfully captured Maduro in the dead of night. It was dark. The lights of Caracas were largely turned off due to a certain expertise that we have. It was dark and it was deadly. But captured along with his wife, Celia Flores, both of whom now face American justice. Maduro and Flores have been indicted in the Southern District of New York, it's Jay Clayton, for their campaign of deadly narco-terrorism against the United States and its citizens.
So that's just an excerpt of Donald Trump's press conference in which he gave details of the U.S. military action in Venezuela. Let's go live to Washington. We saw some pictures of Donald Trump and his top team, still pictures of them watching events in Venezuela as they unfolded in real time from Florida. Donald Trump said it was like watching television, and he described this military action as a stunning achievement for the United States military. Got plenty of detail as well from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, who's on hand for that press conference, and he delivered some details on how exactly the operation proceeded. He said it was a complex air, ground, and space operation. He said that this had been in the planning for several weeks and that U.S. military had, quote, watched waited, prepared, we remained patient and professional. Essentially, we understand that this operation, we're looking at pictures here of President Trump watching this operation. He said that they had arrived with air cover from the U.S. Air Force, that a special team from the U.S. military arrived at a compound in Caracas where Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro was with his wife Celia, who was also captured, that they arrived there at around 1 a.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. And what he called an apprehension force descended into that compound, moved with, quote, speed and precision, isolated the area, and then apprehended the, quote, indicted persons. Now, they did say that the helicopters that were carrying the special Delta force, that they came under fire and responded, that one aircraft was hit but remained flyable, also came back to the aircraft carrier. And they said that after securing Maduro and his wife, the aircraft provided cover for them to depart. They were taking some fire. The force successfully was able to return rather. And we learned that just about 2 hours later rather, that the force was leaving Venezuela with the indicted persons on board, and then they were put on the USS Iwo Jima. So truly an extraordinary operation then, as we've been hearing from how exactly it played out. We heard a number of details as well about the types of aircraft involved: F-22s, F-35s, B-1 bombers, and remotely piloted drones. All of this points to the fact that this was a massive operation, as we heard, that was planned for several weeks, as we understand, all the way back to August. And that is all the more significant as we see these images of this makeshift situation room, if you will, of the defense secretary and the CIA head and the Secretary of State and President Trump all standing there together. President Trump had been questioned several times, what is the aim here? Is it regime change? He was quite vague about whether that was indeed the aim. And indeed, I spoke to a number of Republican members of Congress on this question. They said that is simply too soon to say whether this is regime change. But in the end, we saw Mr. Maduro, of course, arrested, apprehended, and now being brought to the U.S. to face charges. And history tells us it is one thing to topple a regime, to remove its leader, but it's quite another thing to then run the country, as Donald Trump says America is now going to do. Indeed, I put that question precisely to Republican Congressman Michael McCauley, used to run the Foreign Affairs Committee. This was a few weeks ago before this entire operation took place, and he said, look, the U.S. doesn't have a particularly strong history of military interventions in Latin America. And this is going to be the question, and one that has been asked immediately after hearing from President Trump in that press conference that the U.S. plans to, quote, run Venezuela. What does that look like? How long would this involvement be? Would this involve U.S. troops on the ground, boots on the ground? He said, we're not afraid of using boots on the ground. Who in the U.S. would be involved? He referred to the people saying behind him. So the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, well, we know that he has already spoken to the Venezuelan vice president. Will they be working with her? And critically, Ben, the opposition in Venezuela, we know that Maria Corina Machado won the Nobel Peace Prize. There are various members of the opposition that have been strongly lobbying the Trump administration to take strong action against Venezuela. And yet when he was asked about her role, today, President Trump, as you noted earlier, said, well, she doesn't necessarily have the respect that she needs. So what role would the opposition play in any sort of transition? And what will that mean for the U.S. as well? All of these questions remain unanswered. In terms of political reaction to what has happened in the United States, just give us an idea of what people have been saying, because there's been some pretty strong opposition from the Democrats. Yeah, perhaps unsurprisingly, the reaction has been largely partisan. We've seen a number of Republican members of Congress saying Nicolás Maduro is an illegitimate leader. He is one who had been trafficking drugs into the U.S., and it was high time for the U.S. to remove him from power. Democrats here are saying this is simply illegal. Internationally, by international law, this was an illegal move. And also, the U.S. did not sign up for getting involved in a prolonged engagement with Venezuela, which includes running the country. And interesting to note that we saw the House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries comment a little bit earlier in talking about his opposition to this. And he asked a few questions that I thought was interesting. He said, how many American troops will be on the ground in Venezuela? What does it mean for America to run Venezuela until a transition takes place? Were these military strikes about seizing foreign oil to benefit friends of the Trump administration? All of these points being asked by members of Congress, but then perhaps most importantly, we've seen from numerous members of Congress, they wanted to demand that the president come to them for a war powers resolution for any sort of military action in Congress. Well, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said during their press conference, we didn't need to ask Congress for a war powers resolution. And he said this was a different mission. It was about arresting Maduro. That will be questioned this week on the Hill.